People disappear in the snow every winter. Some are found frozen just a few miles from safety. Others leave footprints that suddenly stop in the middle of nowhere. Tonight, you will hear 10 true horror stories from people who got lost in the snow. Stories where silence becomes an enemy, time loses meaning, and the cold feels alive. These are not legends. These are real winter survival nightmares that still terrify Americans. Story 1. White eraser. The snow was eating my footprints. I turned around to look, and they were gone. All of them. Like I had never walked through this forest at all. I need you to understand something horrifying about getting lost in a blizzard. It is not like losing your way in the city or taking a wrong turn on a highway. When you are lost in the snow, in real snow, the kind that falls so thick you can taste the cold in every breath, you are not just separated from where you need to be. You are being slowly erased from the world itself. My truck died 3 miles back. At least I think it was 3 miles. Distance becomes meaningless when every direction looks identical and the wind screams in your ears like something alive and angry. The heater had been sputtering for the last hour, blowing cold air that smelled like burning plastic, and then the engine just gave up. One cough, one shudder, and silence. The kind of silence that only exists in the deep woods during a storm, when even the animals have gone underground to wait it out. I sat there for maybe 20 minutes, watching the snow pile up on the windshield, covering the glass in white static. My phone showed no signal. It had not shown a signal since I left the main highway, chasing what I thought was a shortcut through the mountains. The GPS had stopped working somewhere around mile marker 47, and I had been navigating by road signs that became increasingly rare and difficult to read through the storm. The smart thing would have been to stay with the truck. Every survival guide, every horror story, every cautionary tale says the same thing. Stay with your vehicle, wait for help. But sitting there in that metal box, feeling the temperature drop degree by degree, watching the windows frost over from the inside, something terrible occurred to me. Nobody knew I was out here. Nobody was coming. I had told my brother I would be home by Thursday. It was Monday. I had 3 days before anyone would even think to worry. 3 days in a truck that was already becoming a tomb of ice. So I made the choice. I put on every layer I had, wrapped my scarf around my face until only my eyes showed, and I stepped out into the storm. The plan was simple and stupid. Follow the road back to the highway. Find help. Survive. The cold hit me like a physical thing. Not just temperature, but a presence. It wrapped around my chest and squeezed. Every breath burned. Every exposed inch of skin went numb within seconds. The wind pushed against me with enough force that I had to lean forward to make progress. And the snow came down so thick and fast that I could barely see 10 feet ahead. But I could see the road. It was still visible as a slight depression in the endless white. A path between the trees. I started walking, keeping the tree line on my right, 1 foot in front of the other. Simple, mechanical, survival. After what might have been 30 minutes or 3 hours, time becoming as distorted as distance, I looked back to see how far I had come. That is when I noticed my footprints were gone. Not fading, not being slowly filled in by fresh snow. Gone. Completely absent. As if I had been floating above the ground instead of trudging through knee-deep powder. The fear that gripped me then was not rational. I tried to tell myself it was just the wind, just the heavy snowfall covering my tracks quickly. But I had been walking into the wind. My prints should have been protected, at least partially visible. Instead, there was nothing but smooth, undisturbed white stretching back into the storm. I turned and kept walking. What else could I do? But now I was counting steps, testing myself, proving I existed. Every 100 steps, I would turn around. And every time, there was nothing behind me. The snow was not just covering my path. It was erasing evidence that I had ever been there at all. The trees started to look wrong around hour 2. I know that sounds insane, but I had been staring at pine trees and bare oaks for so long that I knew their shapes, their patterns. These were the same trees. I kept passing the same lightning-struck pine with a split trunk. The same cluster of 3 birches growing so close they looked like fingers reaching up from the ground. I was walking in circles. Somehow, despite following what I thought was a straight line, despite keeping landmarks in sight, I was looping back on myself. Except there were still no footprints. No evidence I had passed this way before. That is when the real horror started to creep in. The disturbing possibility that maybe I was not walking in circles. Maybe the forest was rearranging itself around me. Maybe the snow was not just erasing my footprints but erasing my progress, keeping me trapped in the same mile of woods. The same few minutes of existence, over and over. I started to run. Panic does that. It strips away reason and leaves only the animal need to escape. My legs were numb. My lungs were burning with every frozen breath. But I ran through the snow, crashing through drifts, my boots sinking and pulling, branches whipping across my face. I ran until I could not run anymore, until I fell forward into the snow and lay there gasping, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. When I looked up, I saw the house. It stood maybe 100 yards ahead, barely visible through the storm. A small cabin, dark wood nearly black against the white, no lights in the windows, no smoke from the chimney. But it was shelter, it was structure, it was proof that humans existed out here, that I had not stumbled into some empty pocket of the world where the normal rules no longer applied. I dragged myself to my feet and approached slowly. Something about the cabin felt wrong. It sat too perfectly in its clearing, too deliberately placed. The snow around it was smooth and untouched. No paths, no woodpile, no signs of life or habitation. The door was unlocked. I pushed it open and stepped inside, grateful to be out of the wind even though the interior was barely warmer than outside. The cabin was a single room, a cot in one corner, a cold fireplace, a small table with a single chair, and on the table, a journal. I should have left then. Every instinct I had was screaming at me that this was wrong, that I needed to get out. But I was so cold, so tired, and the journal was open to a page with fresh handwriting. Recent, maybe days old. I read it. The entry was dated 4 days ago. It was written by someone named Marcus. He described getting lost in a storm, leaving his truck, following the road that led nowhere, seeing his footprints disappear behind him, finding a cabin in the woods. This cabin. I flipped back through the journal. There were dozens of entries, different names, different dates going back years. Some entries were just a few lines. Others went on for pages, describing the same experience over and over. Getting lost, the erased footprints, the cabin appearing in the storm. And then, in every case, the same final entry. I think I finally understand. The snow is not covering my tracks. It is pulling me backward. Every time I move forward, it resets me, drags me back to where I started. But not quite the same place. A version of it, a shadow of it. The cabin keeps appearing because I keep arriving. Over and over, a loop I cannot break. And the worst part is, I can feel myself fading. Each reset makes me a little less real, a little more like a footprint in the snow. The last line was written in shaking letters, barely legible. If you are reading this, you are already caught. Start counting your resets. You will need to know which one you are on when you disappear completely. I dropped the journal and backed toward the door. My hand was shaking as I reached for the handle. That is when I saw it, scratched into the wood beside the door frame. Tally marks, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, carved deep into the wood by God knows how many people over God knows how many years. I ran back out into the storm. The cabin disappeared behind me within seconds, swallowed by the white. I did not care about direction anymore. I just ran until my legs gave out and I collapsed again. When I looked up, I saw my truck, the same truck I had left hours ago. It sat in the road ahead of me, covered in fresh snow, exactly as I had left it. But that was impossible. I had been walking away from it. I had covered miles. I approached slowly. My footprints from when I first left the truck should have been there. They were not. Instead, there were other tracks. Dozens of them, all leading away from the truck in different directions, all stopping abruptly after a few yards, as if the people who made them had simply vanished mid-step. I climbed back into the truck. The keys were still in the ignition. I turned them without hope, and the engine roared to life. The heater kicked on, blowing hot air. The radio crackled with static, then found a station. A weather report. Clear skies expected. Storm moving out of the area. I looked out the windshield. The snow was still falling, thick and heavy and wrong. I am writing this now because I need someone to know. I've been driving for 6 hours. The road keeps going straight. The trees keep passing by my windows. But the odometer has not moved. I am still at the same mile marker, the same location. The snow is still erasing my footprints. And now it is erasing the road ahead of me too. Each time I look up, there is less of it. The white is creeping closer to my windshield, inch by inch. I can see the cabin again. Up ahead, waiting, always waiting. And I know that when I get there, I will find the journal. I will read all the entries. And then I will pick up the pen and add my own. Because the snow does not just erase where you have been. It erases where you are going. It erases the difference between moving forward and standing still. Until finally, it erases you. The scary thing about being lost in the snow is not that you might die. It is that you might never have existed at all. I can see the cabin now. The door is opening. I am walking toward it. I have always been walking toward it. Story 2. Cabin that wasn't there yesterday. I should have turned back when I still had daylight. That is what everyone says afterward. ISN to you. But when you lost in a blizzard, watching the sky turn from gray to black, and your fingers are so numb you can barely feel them anymore, you don't. You think straight. You just keep moving. You tell yourself the trail is just ahead. That civilization is around the next bend. That you not really lost at all. I was 3 hours past where I should have been when I saw it through the snow. A cabin, just sitting there in a small clearing, smoke curling from its chimney like something out of a postcard. My heart lurched with relief so powerful it almost knocked me down. I'd been hiking these White Mountains for 15 years, knew every trail marker, every overlook. I'd never seen a cabin in this section of the forest. But hypothermia makes you see things, right? Makes you confused. I convinced myself I just wandered farther than I thought. The cabin looked old, really old. The kind of structure that should have collapsed decades ago, with weathered logs dark as charcoal and windows so covered in grime they were nearly opaque. But that smoke meant warmth. It meant life. It meant I wasn't going to freeze to death out here. I stumbled through the knee-deep snow, my boots crunching with each step. The wind howled around me, throwing ice crystals against my face like tiny needles. The temperature had dropped 20 degrees in the last hour. My lips were cracked and bleeding. My whole body shook so violently I could barely walk straight. When I reached the door, I hesitated. Something felt wrong. The cabin sat too perfectly in that clearing, as if the trees had deliberately grown around it, leaving it completely isolated. No paths led to it, no tire tracks, no footprints except my own. And that smoke from the chimney, it didn't smell like wood burning. It smelled sweet, rotten sweet, like meat left out too long. But I was dying out here. So I knocked. Nothing. I knocked again, harder this time. My knuckles left small dents in the wood. The door was so cold it burned my skin. Still nothing. I tried the handle. It turned easily, and the door swung inward with a long, creaking groan that made my teeth ache. The inside was worse than the outside. A single room, maybe 15 feet across. A stone fireplace on the far wall with actual flames dancing inside it, though I couldn't see any logs. The fire just burned, orange and hungry, casting shadows that moved wrong across the walls. There was a table in the center, rough-hewn and ancient, with 3 chairs around it. Only 3. A small cot sat in the corner, its blankets pulled back as if someone had just gotten out of bed. And the smell, God, the smell, that same sweet rot, but stronger now, mixed with something metallic and sharp. I should have left. Every instinct I had screamed at me to turn around and take my chances with the blizzard. But the warmth felt so good. It wrapped around me like a blanket, seeping into my frozen bones. I stepped inside. The door slammed shut behind me. I spun around, but there was no wind, no draft. The door had just closed on its own. And now when I tried the handle, it wouldn't budge. Locked from the outside somehow, though that made no sense. My breathing quickened. The fear that had been lurking at the edges of my mind suddenly took center stage. This was wrong. This was all terribly, horribly wrong. That's when I noticed the photographs. They covered one entire wall. Dozens of them. Maybe 100. All black and white, all showing the same thing. People standing in front of this cabin. Different people, different clothes spanning what looked like different decades. A woman in a long Victorian dress. A man in work clothes from the Depression era. A family of 4 in 1970s outfits. A young couple in modern hiking gear. Every single person was smiling. But their eyes weren't empty. Their eyes looked empty, dead, like someone had scooped out everything that made them human and left only the shell behind. I moved closer to the wall, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. The most recent photo showed a woman, maybe 30 years old, wearing the exact same jacket I had on. The same brand, the same color. She stood in front of this cabin with that horrible empty smile, and behind her, barely visible in the background, I could see a figure in the window. Something tall and impossibly thin, watching her. My hands started shaking again, but not from the cold this time. I pulled out my phone, desperate for signal, for any connection to the world outside. Nothing, not even a hint of service. But my phone did something weird. The screen flickered, and suddenly my camera app opened on its own. It was taking pictures, rapid-fire shots of the cabin interior, capturing angles I wasn't pointing at. Then it stopped on one image. Me, standing in front of the door, smiling that same empty smile. But I wasn't smiling. I was terrified. The photo had been taken from behind me. I spun around. The cabin was empty. Just me, the fire, the table, the photographs. But someone had taken that picture. Someone was in here with me. I could feel eyes on me now, crawling across my skin like spiders. The fire popped and crackled, and in the sound, I swear I could hear breathing. Low, raspy, patient. I ran to the window, tried to smash it with my elbow. The glass didn't even crack. It felt like hitting concrete. I screamed, pounded on it with both fists until my hands bled, but the glass stayed perfect. Pristine, mocking me. That is when the temperature started dropping. Not gradually, instantly. The warmth that had felt so welcoming moments ago vanished, replaced by a cold so intense it made the blizzard outside feel tropical. My breath came out in thick white clouds. Frost spread across the windows in beautiful, intricate patterns. The fire kept burning, but it gave no heat now. It just danced and flickered, and in the flames, I started to see shapes. Faces, dozens of faces, all twisted in silent screams. The photographs began to move. I watched in horror as the people in those images shifted, turned their heads, looked directly at me. Their mouths opened. They were trying to tell me something, warn me, but no sound came out. Just that same empty stare, that same horrible smile spreading across their faces. The cabin started to change. The walls bent inward, warping like they were breathing. The ceiling lowered inch by inch, pressing down. The space was shrinking, becoming a coffin. I could feel it in the air, thick and suffocating. Something was waking up, something that lived in the walls, in the floor, in the very foundation of this impossible place. Footsteps, above me, slow and deliberate, pacing back and forth across a floor that shouldn't exist. This was a single-story cabin. There was no second level, but the footsteps continued, growing louder, heavier. Whatever was up there was getting closer to the edge, preparing to come down. I grabbed one of the chairs and swung it at the door with everything I had. The wood exploded into splinters, but the door didn't budge. Not even a scratch. I tried again. My muscles screamed. My lungs burned. Nothing. The cabin wouldn't let me leave. That is when I saw the journal on the table. I swear it hadn't been there before. Old leather, cracked and stained. My hands moved on their own, opening it. The pages were filled with handwriting. Different handwriting. Different people, different years, all telling the same story. Found cabin in storm. Door locked. Can to leave. Something watches. Something waits. Getting colder. So cold. It's coming down now. I can hear it on the stairs that Aaron did there. God help me. I can see it in the fire. It wants. The entry ended mid-sentence. The footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was worse than any sound. I could feel it now, standing right behind me, tall enough that its head would brush the ceiling, thin enough that it shouldn't be able to stand. I could smell it, that sweet rot, that meat smell. It was breathing on the back of my neck, each exhale cold as death. Dawn, to turn around. Every fiber of my being screamed it. Dawn, to look. Dawn, to acknowledge it. But my body wasn't listening to me anymore. My head began to turn. Slowly, mechanically, like I was a puppet and someone else was pulling the strings. I saw its shadow first, cast by the fire, stretching across the wall. Impossibly long limbs. A head that wasn't quite the right shape. Fingers that ended in points. It swayed slightly, as if moved by a breeze that didn't exist. Then my phone buzzed. One message, from my own number. Welcome home. The shadow moved, reached for me. Those pointed fingers extending, stretching across the wall like black oil spreading across water. I squeezed my eyes shut, pressed myself against the door, and screamed. Screamed until my throat was raw. Screamed until I tasted blood. The cold vanished. Warmth flooded back. The footsteps stopped. I opened my eyes. Morning. Sunlight streamed through the windows. The door hung open, swinging gently in a light breeze. The storm had passed. The photographs were gone. The journal was gone. The cabin looked different, older somehow, more decayed. The roof had caved in places. Moss grew on everything. It looked like it had been abandoned for decades. I ran, didn't stop running until I found the trail, then the parking lot. then my car. I drove straight to the ranger station, told them everything. They listened with patient expressions, the kind you give someone suffering from exposure and hypothermia. Check it out, they said. Make sure I was okay. Did I want medical attention? 3 days later, they called. They found the location I described. There was no cabin there, just an empty clearing in the woods. No foundation, no evidence any structure had ever existed there. They showed me satellite images going back 30 years. That clearing had always been empty. But here, it's the thing that keeps me up at night. The thing that made me leave Colorado and move to a city where the only trees are in parks and the only wilderness is safely behind fences. A week after I got home, a package arrived. No return address. Inside was a photograph, black and white. Me, standing in front of that cabin, wearing my hiking gear. I am smiling, that empty, horrible smile. And behind me, in the window, something tall and thin is watching. On the back, written in handwriting I done to recognize, are 4 words. See you next winter. I burned the photograph, threw the ashes in the river, changed my number, but it doesn't matter, because sometimes, on cold nights when the wind howls and snow starts to fall, I can smell it. That sweet rot, that meat smell, and I know that somewhere out there in the darkness, a cabin that shouldn't exist is waiting. The door is open, the fire is burning, and there is an empty space on the wall where my photograph will hang forever, right next to all the others who thought they found shelter from the storm. I tell myself I'll never go hiking in winter again. That I did learn my lesson. But deep down, in the part of me that still feels those shadow fingers reaching across the wall, I know the truth. The cabin decides when you visit, not you. And when the snow falls heavy enough, when you lost and freezing and desperate, you will see it too. That perfect little cabin in the clearing. Smoke rising from the chimney, promising warmth, promising safety, promising everything you need to survive. Just remember, when that door closes behind you, it is already too late. You're not a visitor anymore. You're part of the collection. In winter, distance lies. What looks like a short walk can turn into hours of wandering. And the next story began exactly that way. Story 3, Voices in the Whiteout. I'm going to tell you something that happened to me 5 years ago. Something that still wakes me up at 3 in the morning. Something that changed the way I understand what is real and what I assume. And if you re-listening to this, I need you to understand, I was not crazy. I was not hallucinating. What I experienced was real, and it was horrifying. It started on a Tuesday in January. I was driving through Wyoming on my way to Denver for a job interview. The road was empty, just me and my 2015 Honda Civic on Interstate 80, heading straight into the teeth of winter. The sky had been gray all day, but I wasn't worried. I've driven in snow plenty of times. I am a careful driver. I thought nothing of the little weather. By the time the first flakes started falling, I was 100 miles from anywhere. No cell service, just the dark highway stretching ahead like the mouth of something waiting to swallow me whole. The wind picked up, the snow began to fall heavier, then heavier still. Within 30 minutes, the visibility dropped so drastically that I could barely see the hood of my car. This wasn't normal snow anymore. This was a whiteout. My heart started beating faster. I knew the smart thing was to pull over and wait it out, but there was nowhere to pull over. The shoulders of the highway had disappeared under the accumulation. The world had become a tunnel of white, closing in on me from every direction. I couldn't see more than 6 feet in front of my windshield. The snow hypnotized me. It moved in patterns that almost looked intentional, almost looked like something alive was trying to hide itself in the clouds. I slowed down to 15 miles per hour. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my fingers went numb. The only sounds were the engine, the wind screaming against my car, and the metallic whisper of snow hitting the glass. I was completely alone on this highway, completely isolated. The kind of isolation that makes your brain start doing strange things. That's when I heard it. My name. Someone was calling my name. I jerked my head toward the driver, his side window. My breath caught in my throat. Through the wall of white, I could see nothing. But the voice was there, distant, hollow, calling out. Marcus. Marcus. My actual name. Someone out there in the creepy darkness knew who I was. I told myself it was the wind. Wind does that sometimes. Wind howls and moans and almost sounds like words if you listen long enough. That is what I told myself. That is what any rational person would tell themselves. but something in my chest knew better. Something primal and ancient inside me recognized that this was not the sound of wind. This was a voice. This was someone trying to reach me. I pressed harder on the accelerator. The car shuddered through a patch of ice. I eased off. My mouth had gone dry. The voice came again, closer now. Marcus, Marcus, come back, come back. The words had a disturbing, eerie quality to them, like they were being spoken underwater or through glass. The sound was all around me, coming from both sides, from above, from somewhere deep in the whiteout itself. My mind raced. Was there someone else on the highway? An accident? A stranded motorist? I had passed no one for the last 60 miles. No headlights, no signs of life, nothing but empty, haunted stretches of asphalt and the growing sense that something profoundly wrong was happening. I turned on my headlights full brightness. They just bounced off a wall of snow and back at me, illuminating nothing. Worse than useless. I turned on the radio, cranked the volume, filled the car with noise to block out the voice. But I could still hear it underneath the generic pop station and the static and the engine sounds. Marcus, Marcus, it knows my name. Whatever this is, it knows my name. The fear that seized me was unlike anything I had ever felt. Not the fear of a car accident. Not the fear of being stranded. This was something deeper and more chilling. This was the fear of the unknown. The fear that something impossible was happening and I had no control over it. The fear that reality itself was bending in some nightmarish, terrifying way that my mind couldn't to fully comprehend. I passed a mile marker, then another. Each one meant I was driving further into the whiteout, further from anything or anyone who could help me. The landscape was becoming even more barren, more isolated. I remembered reading somewhere that in true whiteout conditions, people had driven off cliffs because they couldn't see where the road ended. They just kept going straight and went flying into the darkness. The voice changed. It became multiple voices now. Marcus, Marcus, come back to us. The sound of it was nightmarish, unsettling, like an entire crowd of something was surrounding my car, pressing against the windows, speaking in unison. But when I looked out the windows, there was nothing. Only the endless, creepy white. No figures, no shadows, no physical evidence of anything except that chilling, terrifying sound. I felt my sanity starting to slip. Was this what a breakdown felt like? Were my ears playing tricks on me? The isolation and fear were crushing down on me like a weight. The highway seemed to stretch on forever. The snow seemed to be getting thicker, not thinner. Like I was driving into the heart of the storm rather than through it. And then something extraordinary happened. Something that made my blood turn to ice. The voices started saying something else. Not my name. Numbers. They chanted numbers in a horrifying, eerie rhythm. 17, 82, 3, 41. Over and over. 17, 82, 3, 41. The same sequence, repeated endlessly by that awful, chilling chorus. I didn't recognize the numbers. I had no idea what they meant, but they felt important, significant, like a message meant specifically for me. I was hyperventilating now. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep the car between the invisible lane markers. Sweat poured down my face despite the cold that seemed to be seeping through the windows. I was losing it. I had to be losing it. None of this was real. It couldn't be real. But it was. That's when I saw the headlights. Another car coming toward me through the whiteout, coming from the wrong direction, coming straight at me on my side of the highway. I screamed and wrenched the wheel to the right. The car skidded, the back end fishtailed. I felt the sickening sensation of losing control, but the other vehicle missed me. It passed within feet of my door, and in that split second, I saw someone behind the wheel. It was me, the same face, the same expression of pure terror, the same person I was looking at in every mirror. I accelerated. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely grip the wheel. The other car was gone now, swallowed by the whiteout as quickly as it had appeared. But I knew what I had seen. I couldn't have seen it. But I did. The voices had stopped. The chilling, eerie silence that replaced them was somehow worse. I drove for what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes. My mind kept replaying the image of that other car, that other me. Was it a reflection in the snow? A hallucination born of fear and isolation? A glimpse of something impossible? Then I saw the sign. A reflector mile marker. And beneath it, weathered and barely visible, someone had carved words into the wood. I only caught a few letters as I passed, but I read enough. I read 17, 82, 3, 41, the same numbers the voices had chanted. Those numbers were carved into that marker. But they have been. That made no sense. That meant the voices had been telling me something. That meant they knew. That meant everything I was experiencing was something far more frightening and disturbing than a simple breakdown. The snow began to thin. The whiteout was releasing me. After what felt like a terrifying eternity, I could see 50 feet ahead. Then 100. The whiteness receded like something alive, pulling back to reveal the highway beneath. The world was still and silent and completely barren. I could see for miles now, and there was nothing. No other cars, no buildings, no sign that anyone else existed in this vast, empty landscape. I drove for another hour without seeing a single other vehicle. The interview in Denver, I didn't make it. My phone finally found a signal, and I turned around. I called my boss and told him I had been in an accident. It wasn't true, but I couldn't explain what had happened. How could I? For 3 days afterward, I couldn't stop thinking about those numbers. 17, 82, 3, 41. They haunted me. They felt like they meant something, like they were a message from something that had been trying to communicate with me in that whiteout. So I did something I probably shouldn't have done. I looked them up. 17, 82, 3, 41. Exit numbers. Exit 17, exit 82, exit 3, exit 41. All on Interstate 80. All in Wyoming. All places where vehicles had disappeared over the years. All places where stranded motorists had been found frozen in their cars, or not found at all. Remote stretches of highway. Isolated sections where the cell service died and the world went silent. And one more thing. When I searched for highway disappearances in that region, I found historical records of a bus crash on that exact highway in 1983. In the whiteout, in January, 41 people died. None of the bodies were ever recovered. The official report said they had been thrown from the bus and buried in the snow, lost forever in the drift. 17 witnesses reported seeing something impossible that day. 82 rescue workers responded to the scene. 3 days passed before the snow melted enough to find the wreckage. 41 people were confirmed dead. Those voices were calling me. Those voices were the ones lost in the white. They had been trying to tell me something, trying to warn me, trying to reach out from wherever they were trapped. I haven't driven through Wyoming since. I never will. And sometimes, when the snow falls heavy and the world becomes that creepy, suffocating white, I swear I can still hear them. Calling, chanting those numbers, trying to reach someone new, trying to warn them, or pull them in, or something worse. The most terrifying part isn't the experience itself. The most horrifying part is this. Sometimes I wonder if I ever actually made it out of that whiteout. Sometimes I wonder if I'm still in there right now, driving through the eternal white, and everything that happened after was just a nightmare I've been living. And sometimes, in the darkest hours of the night, I wonder if my voice is out there now too, calling from that terrible, endless place, calling someone else's name, chanting numbers I'll never understand. That's what the whiteout takes from you. Your escape. Story 4. Trail that led nowhere. The trail markers were moving. I know how that sounds. I know what you were thinking. But I am telling you, the blue blazes painted on the trees were not where they had been 5 minutes earlier. I had hiked Eagle Ridge Trail dozens of times, maybe 100 times over the past decade. It was my routine, my meditation, the 3-mile loop I walked every Saturday morning through the White Mountains. I knew every turn, every switchback, every rocky outcrop. I could have walked it blindfolded. That morning, when the first snow of December started falling, I thought nothing of heading out. Just a light dusting. Nothing scary, nothing dangerous. I had my gear, my phone, my years of experience. The horrifying thing about familiarity is that it makes you blind. You stop paying attention. You stop questioning. You trust that the world will remain consistent, that the path you have walked 100 times will be the same path today. You never consider that something might be changing it, rewriting it, leading you somewhere else entirely. The first sign something was wrong came at the half-mile marker. There was a fallen oak tree blocking the path that had not been there the week before. A massive thing, easily 3 feet in diameter, roots torn from the earth like it had been ripped out by something with terrible strength. But there had been no storms, no high winds. The weather had been calm for days. I climbed over it, my boots crunching through the fresh snow, and continued on. The trail should have started its gentle ascent toward the ridge at this point. Instead, it stayed flat. The incline I knew by heart, the burn I always felt in my calves, it was not there. The path stretched ahead through the trees, perfectly level, vanishing into the increasing snowfall. I told myself I was distracted. Maybe I had miscounted the distance. Maybe the fallen tree had confused my internal map. But the unsettling feeling in my gut was growing stronger with every step. Something felt wrong. The trees looked different, taller. Their branches reached overhead at strange angles, creating shadows that seemed too dark for morning light filtered through clouds. That is when I noticed the silence. A creepy, total absence of sound. No birds, no wind rustling through the pines, no distant highway noise, just the crunch of my boots through the snow and my own breathing, loud in my ears. The kind of silence that makes you feel watched, hunted. I checked my phone. No signal. That was normal for parts of the trail, but I should have had at least one bar this close to the trailhead. The screen showed nothing, not even an emergency signal. The GPS was spinning, unable to locate satellites, the blue dot representing my location drifting aimlessly across a blank map. The next blaze marker should have been 30 yards ahead. I had counted them obsessively over the years, knew their rhythm and spacing. When I reached where it should have been, I found it painted on a different tree. Not the tall pine on the right side of the trail, but a birch on the left. And the mark looked fresh. The blue paint was bright, almost wet-looking, standing out against the white bark. I touched it. My finger came away clean, but the paint felt warm. On a morning where the temperature was hovering around 20 degrees, where my breath formed clouds and my face was numb with cold, the paint was warm like it had just been applied. Like something had just marked this tree to keep me moving forward. Fear started crawling up my spine. Real fear, the kind that makes your mouth go dry and your heart hammer against your ribs. I turned around, intending to head back to the trailhead, to get out of these woods that suddenly felt wrong and hostile and alive with something I could not name. The trail behind me was gone, not covered by snow, not obscured, gone. Where there had been a clear path stretching back the way I had come, there was only forest. Dense, impenetrable underbrush and closely packed trees with no space between them. No way through. It was as if the trail had sealed itself behind me, erasing my escape route step by step. I stood there, my mind refusing to accept what my eyes were showing me. This was not possible. Trails do not disappear. Forests do not rearrange themselves. But the evidence was right in front of me, undeniable and terrifying. I was trapped on a path that only went forward, with no way back. The snow was falling harder now. What had started as a light dusting was becoming a legitimate storm. The flakes were large and wet, sticking to everything, building up fast. Visibility was dropping. I could see maybe 40 feet ahead before the world dissolved into white static. I had no choice but to keep moving. Standing still meant freezing. It meant giving up. I started walking again, following the blue blazes that appeared at irregular intervals, always just visible through the storm, always leading deeper into woods that became increasingly unfamiliar and disturbing. The trees started to change. At first, it was subtle. The proportions were slightly off. The spacing was wrong. But as I walked, they became genuinely strange. Pines with needles that looked too long, hanging down like hair. Oaks with bark that seemed to pulse, as if something was moving beneath it. Branches that curved in impossible ways, forming shapes that hurt to look at, geometries that made my eyes water and my head ache. I passed another marker. This one was not just warm. It was glowing faintly in the dim light, the blue paint luminescent like foxfire. And beneath it, carved into the bark, were tally marks. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, cut deep into the wood by something sharp, counting off days or victims or passages. I did not want to know which. The path began to descend. Steeply. The familiar trail never descended this early, never plunged downward at this angle. I was sliding more than walking, my boots struggling to find purchase on snow-covered rocks. The temperature was dropping fast. My fingers were going numb inside my gloves. My face felt like frozen leather. That is when I heard the footsteps behind me, crunching through snow, steady, methodical, keeping pace with me. I spun around, my heart in my throat, and saw nothing. Just the trail stretching upward into the storm, empty and white and waiting. But the footsteps did not stop. They continued, closer now, the sound of something large moving through the snow, breathing heavy, closing the distance. I ran. Terror gave me energy I did not know I had. I crashed down the trail, arms windmilling for balance, nearly falling a dozen times. The footsteps behind me matched my pace, always the same distance away, never falling behind, never catching up. Just following, relentless. The path leveled out. I burst into a clearing I had never seen before. It was perfectly circular, maybe 50 feet across, and the snow here was different. It was not white, it was gray, ash gray, and it was not cold. As I stumbled to a stop in the center of the clearing, I realized the snow beneath my feet was warm. Almost hot, steam was rising from it, creating a fog that hung at waist level. Around the perimeter of the clearing stood 7 trees. They were dead, completely lifeless, bark black and cracking, branches like skeletal fingers. And on each tree was carved a symbol, not the blue trail markers. Something older, something that predated hiking trails and park services and human navigation systems. Symbols that looked like they had been cut into the wood centuries ago, weathered but still visible, still holding power. The footsteps had stopped, the forest behind me was silent again, but I was not alone. I could feel it, the presence of something watching from the trees, from the shadows, from the spaces between spaces. That is when I saw the other trails. Leading out from the clearing were not one path but 6. 6 different trails, each marked with a different color blaze. Red, green, yellow, white, black, and purple. They radiated out like spokes from a wheel, disappearing into the storm in different directions. None of them looked familiar. None of them matched the trail system I knew. And in the center of the clearing, half buried in the warm gray snow, was a sign. A wooden trail marker, old and rotted, the letters barely legible. But I could make out the words. Eagle Ridge Trail, established 1887. Lost, 1923. Lost. Not closed, not abandoned. Lost. The chilling realization hit me then. This was the original trail. The real Eagle Ridge. The one that had vanished decades ago. The one that had been replaced by the safe, well-maintained loop I thought I had been hiking. The trail that had led hikers into these mountains and never led them back out. The trail that had been officially closed, erased from maps, forgotten by everyone except the forest itself. And somehow, I had found it. Or it had found me. The wind picked up, howling through the dead trees, and I heard something else beneath it. Voices, faint, distant, crying out, calling for help. How many people had walked this path? How many had followed the blazes deeper and deeper, thinking they knew where they were going, until the trail led them here? To this clearing? To this choice? I had to pick a path. Standing still was not an option. The temperature was still dropping. My body was shaking uncontrollably now, hypothermia setting in. But which trail? They all looked identical. They all led into darkness and storm and unknown horror. I chose the red trail. No reason, just instinct. I started walking, following the red blazes that appeared every few yards, each one bright and fresh and warm to the touch. The path climbed again, winding through the trees, and I could hear the voices growing louder. Not behind me now, ahead, leading me on. The disturbing thought occurred to me that the voices were not calling for help. They were calling me, drawing me forward, promising safety, promising warmth and shelter and rest. But the words were wrong. The language was not quite English. The rhythm was off, like something was imitating human speech without quite understanding it. I came to another clearing, smaller this time, and in the center was a structure, a shelter, 3 walls and a roof, the kind the Park Service builds at campsites. But this one was ancient. The wood was gray and splintered. The roof sagged dangerously, and inside, I could see shapes, bundles of clothing, sleeping bags, backpacks, all covered in snow and ice, all empty. This was where they ended up. The lost hikers, the ones who followed the trail that led nowhere. They made it this far. They took shelter, and they never left. Their gear was still here, frozen in time, waiting for owners who had simply disappeared. I backed away from the shelter. The nightmare was becoming too real, too immediate. I needed to get out. I needed to find the real world again. But I had no idea which direction that was. The storm had intensified to whiteout conditions. I could barely see 3 feet ahead. That is when my boot hit something solid under the snow. I looked down and started digging, my frozen hands clawing at the powder. What I uncovered made my blood freeze colder than any temperature could. Trail markers, dozens of them, all colors, red, blue, green, yellow, white, black, purple. They were piled together like discarded signs, half buried, forgotten. And they were not markers for different trails. They were all for the same trail, Eagle Ridge, each one painted a different color, each one dated differently, spanning over a century. The truth was so much worse than I had imagined. There was no original trail. There had never been one consistent path. The trail changed. It evolved. It adapted. Every few years, every few decades, it would shift, would rewrite itself, would present a new version to new victims. The blue blazes I had been following were just the latest iteration. Before that, it had been marked in green. Before that, red, going back and back through time. The trail was not lost in 1923. The trail was alive. It had been alive long before humans came to these mountains. It had been hunting long before we built our parks and our signs and our false sense of safety. And I had walked right into it. The footsteps started again, closer this time, all around me. Not one set, but many. Dozens. A circle tightening. Whatever was out there in the storm. Whatever lived in the spaces between the trees. It was done playing. Done leading me in circles. Done pretending to be a simple hiking trail. I ran again, blind, directionless, crashing through the forest with no path to follow. Branches tore at my face. Roots caught my boots. The snow was up to my knees now, dragging at me, pulling me down. Behind me, the footsteps kept pace. In front of me, I could see lights. Faint, blue, hovering between the trees like lanterns. The trail markers, they were glowing now, all around me, in every direction, hundreds of them, creating a maze of light in the darkness. And I realized with creeping horror that they were not showing me the way out. They were showing me the boundaries, the edges of the hunting ground. Everything inside this perimeter belonged to the trail. I burst through a wall of undergrowth and found myself on pavement. Real, solid, blessed pavement. A road. I had made it to a road. I stood there gasping, crying with relief, looking both ways for any sign of traffic. The road stretched in both directions, vanishing into the storm. And painted on the asphalt, clear as day despite the snow, were blue lines. Trail markers, leading both ways. The road was part of the trail. It had always been part of the trail. I collapsed to my knees. There was no escape. No matter which direction I chose, no matter how far I ran, I was still on the path. The trail that led nowhere. The trail that had been leading me nowhere since the moment I stepped off the familiar world and into this nightmare version of the mountains I thought I knew. A car appeared through the storm, headlights cutting through the white. It pulled up beside me. The driver, his window rolled down. I looked inside, desperate for help, for rescue, for proof that the normal world still existed somewhere. The driver, his seat was empty. The steering wheel turned on its own, and on the dashboard, mounted where a GPS should be, was a wooden trail marker. Blue paint, fresh and glowing. The passenger door swung open. An invitation. I am writing this on my phone. What little battery I have left, because I need someone to know. The Eagle Ridge Trail is not safe. It never was. The real trail is still out there, still hunting, still leading people away from safety and into something ancient and hungry and patient. If you ever go hiking and the trail starts to feel wrong, if the markers seem to be moving, if the path behind you disappears, do not follow it. Do not trust it. It is not leading you anywhere you want to go. I am getting in the car now, not because I want to, but because I am so cold and so tired and so lost that I do not have another choice. The trail always gives you a choice. It just never gives you a good one. The scary thing is not that the trail led nowhere. It is that it led exactly where it wanted me to go. And I followed every step of the way. The car is moving now, driving itself down the road marked with blue paint. The storm is clearing. I can see the trees thinning. I can see lights ahead. A town, maybe. Civilization. But the road signs are wrong. The mile markers are counting backward. And through the clearing storm, I can see them. More trails, spreading out from this road like veins from an artery, red and green and yellow in colors I do not have names for. Each one marked, each one waiting. The trail does not end. It just branches. And now I am part of it. Another marker in the system. Another warm blue glow leading the next hiker deeper into the woods. If you are reading this, if you find my phone on some trail somewhere, know that I tried to warn you. Know that some paths do not lead back. They only lead on, forever, into the cold and the dark and the endless white. I can see the first hiker now, standing at a trailhead up ahead, looking at a map, about to step onto the path. I want to warn them. I want to scream, but my voice is gone. The cold took it. The trail took it. All I could do is watch as they followed the blue blazes. One step at a time, deeper, lost, just like me. The trail that led nowhere leads everywhere. That is the truly terrifying part. And it is always growing. When snow covers every landmark, direction becomes meaningless. The person in the next story thought they knew where they were until everything looked the same. Story 5. Snowed in and watched. The most terrifying thing about being lost in a blizzard is not the cold or the darkness. It's realizing that you're not alone out there. That something else is moving through the snow with you, watching you, waiting for you to make a mistake. I learned this 3 winters ago on Highway 89, somewhere between Flagstaff and the Utah border. My truck died at 8:30 on a Friday night, temperature already dropping below zero, snow falling so thick I couldn't see 10 feet in any direction. No cell service, no cars passing by, just me, my dying flashlight, and 20 miles of empty desert highway stretching in both directions. The scary part wasn't being stranded. I had supplies, blankets, water, enough granola bars to last a few days if I rationed them. The terrifying part came later, when I realized the footprints in the snow around my truck weren't all mine. I'd been driving home from a job site in Flagstaff, running late because the project had gone over schedule. Should have left at noon, should have beaten the storm, but I stayed to finish the work, and by the time I hit the road, the weather reports were already calling it the worst blizzard in 30 years. They weren't wrong. Within an hour, the highway disappeared under 2 feet of fresh powder. The wind shrieked across the high desert like something alive and angry. Then my engine started making that sound. That horrible grinding noise that means you're about to spend a lot of money you don't have. I barely got the truck onto the shoulder before it died completely. Wouldn't to turn over. Wouldn't to even click. Just dead. I tried my phone. Nothing. The storm must have knocked out the cell towers. I tried the radio. Static on every channel except one. And that one was just playing the emergency broadcast warning people to stay off the roads. Real helpful. So I made the smart choice. Stayed with the truck. Kept the hazard lights running off the battery. Wrapped myself in blankets and settled in to wait out the storm. Help would come in the morning. Highway patrol would find me. Everything would be fine. That's what I told myself for the first 2 hours. Then I saw the first footprint. I'd gotten out to relieve myself, struggled through the knee-deep snow to the back of the truck, and that was when my flashlight beam caught it. A print, fresh. The snow was falling so hard that anything older than 10 minutes got buried. But this print was clear. Deep, like something heavy had stepped there. But it wasn't a boot print. The shape was wrong. Too narrow, too long. The toes, if that's what they were, splayed out in a way that made my stomach clench. I told myself it was an animal. Deer, maybe, or elk. Lots of wildlife out here in the high desert. Nothing creepy about that. Nothing disturbing at all. Except the print was walking on 2 legs. I could see the stride pattern. Left foot, right foot, coming from the darkness beyond my headlights and circling around toward the passenger side of my truck. I got back inside fast, locked the doors, killed the headlights to save battery. Sat there in the darkness with just my flashlight, trying to control my breathing. The wind hammered against the truck, rocking it on its suspension. Snow piled up on the windshield, turning the world outside into a wall of white static. For a while, nothing happened. I convinced myself I imagined it. The cold does things to your head, makes you paranoid, makes you see things that aren't there. I was probably just spooked by the isolation, the eerie howling of the wind, the way the storm made everything feel hostile and alien. Then something walked past my window. I didn't see it clearly, just a shadow moving through the falling snow, tall and thin, passing within inches of the glass. My flashlight was pointed down at my lap, and by the time I raised it, the shadow was gone. But I heard it, footsteps crunching in the snow, slow, deliberate, circling the truck. My heart felt like it was trying to break through my ribs. I spun in my seat, trying to track the sound, but it kept moving. Around the front, past the driver, his side, behind me, always just outside the circle of my flashlight beam, staying in that margin of darkness where I couldn't quite see it. The footsteps stopped at my door. I sat frozen, flashlight gripped so tight my knuckles went white. My breath came out in rapid clouds of vapor. The temperature inside the truck had dropped. I could see frost forming on the windows. Something was standing right outside my door. I could feel it, that horrible sensation of being watched, of something studying you with an intelligence that feels wrong and predatory. Then it knocked. 3 slow, heavy thuds against the metal. Knock, 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 each one reverberating through the truck like a drumbeat. I didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't make a sound. Every instinct screamed at me to stay still, stay quiet. Done. Let it know I am afraid. The knocking stopped. The footsteps resumed, moving away from the truck, heading back out into the storm. I waited 5 minutes, 10, 15, nothing. just the wind and the snow and the creaking of metal contracting in the cold. I am not ashamed to admit I was terrified. This wasn't some vague fear of the dark or childish nightmare. This was primal, the kind of fear that lives in your DNA, passed down from ancestors who knew what it meant to be prey. Something was out there, something that walked on two legs but wasn't human, something that had found me stranded and helpless. I turned on my hazard lights again, needing the illumination, needing to push back the darkness. The red and amber flashes painted the falling snow in bursts of color. I could see maybe 20 feet in each direction now. Empty highway, empty desert, nothing moving except the blizzard. Then I saw them, dozens of footprints, hundreds maybe, all around the truck in concentric circles, layered on top of each other like something had been pacing around me for hours. The disturbing thing was how they changed. The outer circles showed those strange, elongated prints I'd seen before. But as they got closer to the truck, they became more human, more normal, like whatever was making them was learning, adapting, trying to look like something I wouldn't fear. That's when I noticed my flashlight was dimming. The batteries were dying. In another hour, maybe less, I'd be sitting in complete darkness. The hazard lights wouldn't last much longer either. The battery was already struggling in the cold. Soon I'd have nothing. No light, no way to see what was out there circling in the snow. I started the engine, or tried to. It turned over once, twice, then nothing. Dead. I tried again. The starter clicked uselessly. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the key. The nightmare was getting worse. I was trapped in a metal box with no power, no heat, no way to call for help, and something inhuman stalking me in the worst blizzard in decades. The scratching started around midnight. Soft at first, just a gentle scraping sound against the roof of the truck, like branches in the wind, except there were no trees out here, nothing tall enough to reach the roof. I shined my dying flashlight up at the ceiling and saw it flex. Something heavy was up there, walking. The metal groaned under its weight. It moved from the back of the truck to the front, slow, methodical. I could track its progress by the sound, the horrible scraping scratch of something dragging across the metal. Then it stopped directly above my head. I stared up at the roof, watching a small dent form. Press, release, press, release. Like it was testing the metal, seeing how much pressure it could take before breaking through. I did the only thing I could think of. I laid on the horn, held it down, let the sound blast out into the storm, hoping someone, anyone, might hear it. The thing on the roof went still. The scratching stopped. For a moment, I thought I'd scared it off. Then the windshield cracked. Not from the cold, from impact. Something hit it from outside, right in the center, and a spider web of fractures spread across the glass. I screamed. Couldn't to help it. The sound ripped out of my throat as I scrambled backward in my seat. Another impact. The crack spread wider. Whatever was out there was trying to break in. I grabbed my tire iron from under the seat. It was a pathetic weapon against whatever this thing was, but it made me feel slightly less helpless. The impacts continued, steady, patient. The glass held, but barely. Each hit sent fragments of safety glass cascading onto the dashboard. That's when my flashlight died. The beam flickered once and went out, plunging me into darkness broken only by the dying glow of my hazard lights. I was blind, helpless, listening to something systematically destroying my windshield while the storm raged and the temperature dropped and help was miles away. The impact stopped. Silence. Just the wind. The hazard lights flickered, dimmed, and died. Total darkness. Total silence except for my ragged breathing and the hammering of my heart. Then I heard it breathing. Right outside the shattered windshield. Long, slow breaths that sounded wrong. Too deep. Too controlled. And underneath it, a sound like grinding metal. Like something chilling and mechanical trying to mimic human respiration. I couldn't see it, but I knew it was right there. Inches from my face, separated only by cracked glass and darkness. I could smell it now. Something sharp and chemical, like ozone after lightning. Like burnt plastic. Nothing natural. Nothing from this world. My hand found my phone in the darkness. I knew it had no signal, but I opened it anyway, desperate for any light. The screen glowed, blindingly bright after the total darkness. And in that split second of illumination, I saw it. A face, pressed against the broken windshield. Not human, the proportions were wrong. Eyes too large, too far apart, reflecting the phone light like an animal. Skin that looked smooth and gray, almost translucent. And a mouth, open wide, filled with too many teeth arranged in concentric circles like a lamprey. The phone went dark, battery dead. But that image was burned into my brain. That horrifying face, that impossible mouth, the way it had tilted its head when the light hit it, curious and hungry and so utterly alien that my mind struggled to process what I'd seen. I sat in the darkness, gripping the tire iron, waiting for the glass to finally break, waiting for those impossibly long fingers to reach in and grab me. But nothing happened. The breathing sound faded. The presence outside the truck withdrew. Footsteps crunched away into the snow, growing fainter, until all I could hear was the wind. I died. Do you remember much about the rest of that night? I think I passed out from fear or exhaustion or hypothermia. When I woke up, it was dawn. The storm had passed. The highway was visible again, and less than a mile down the road, I could see the flashing lights of a highway patrol car. They found me half frozen but alive, got my truck towed, gave me a ride to the nearest town. The officer asked about the windshield, said it looked like I'd hit something. I told him it was the storm, debris in the wind. He seemed to accept that. What else could I say? That something had tried to break into my truck? That I'd seen a face that couldn't exist? But here is what keeps me up at night. What makes me avoid that stretch of highway even now, 3 years later? When the tow truck driver loaded up my truck, he walked around it first, checking for damage. I watched him from the patrol car, watched him stop, bend down, look at something in the snow. Then he glanced back at me with an expression I'll never forget. Not fear exactly, more like recognition, like he'd seen something he knew but wished he hadn't. He never said what it was, never mentioned it, just finished loading the truck and drove off. But I know he saw those footprints, saw how they circled the truck, saw how they changed from something alien to something almost human. And I know he recognized them because this wasn't the first time. Wasn't even the 100th. People go missing on that highway. Not often, maybe 2 or 3 a year. They find the vehicles eventually, always after major storms, always abandoned. The people are never found. The official reports call it exposure, hypothermia, wandering off in confusion. But the locals know better. They talk about it in bars and diners when they think tourists aren't listening. About the thing that hunts the high desert when the snow falls. The thing that walks like a man but isn't. The thing that watches and waits and takes people who make the mistake of stopping. I got lucky. Maybe it was the horn that scared it off. Maybe it just wasn't hungry. Or maybe, and this is the thought that truly terrifies me, maybe it let me go. Maybe it wanted someone to survive, to tell the story, to warn others, so that the next time the snow falls and someone breaks down on that empty stretch of highway, they'll all be afraid. They'll all know something is out there. And fear makes the hunt so much more satisfying. I sold my truck, bought a new one. I take different routes now, even if they add hours to my trips. And when winter comes and the snow starts falling, I stay home. Because I remember that face pressed against my windshield. I remember those footprints circling in the darkness. And I know that somewhere out there, on Highway 89 between Flagstaff and the border, something is waiting for the next storm. Waiting for the next stranded traveler. Waiting to knock 3 times on their door and watch them realize, in that moment of pure horror, that they are not alone in the darkness. And they never will be again. Story 6. Footprints that followed me. I am going to tell you what happened to me 3 winters ago. And I need you to listen carefully, because this is not a story. This is a true account of something horrifying, something that changed me forever. And if you were ever caught alone in deep snow, you need to know what to watch for. The chilling truth is this: you are never as alone as you think you are. I was hiking in the Cascade Mountains near Washington State, December 23rd. I know that date because it was supposed to be my last day before I drove down to visit my sister in Portland. I am an experienced hiker. I've been doing this for 30 years. I thought I knew what I was doing. I was catastrophically wrong. The forecast said light snow, maybe 6 inches by evening. I left my car at the trailhead at 7 in the morning. The air was crisp but not unbearable. The sky was that peculiar gray that comes before a storm, a color that looks almost nervous. The trail was familiar to me. I had hiked it a dozen times before. It was a 9-mile loop through old-growth forest, and the last time I did it in winter was 5 years prior. I wasn't too worried. By noon, the snow had started coming harder than predicted. By 1 o'clock, it was intense. By 2, I realized I had made a terrible mistake. The trail markers that I remembered clearly were now buried under white. The world had transformed into something unrecognizable. All the landmarks looked the same. The trees were thick and heavy with snow. The landscape had become a maze of identical passages, and I had somehow stepped off the marked trail without even realizing it. I tried not to panic. Panic kills. Everyone knows that. The smart thing to do was to stop moving, find shelter, build a fire, wait for rescue. But I couldn't stop myself from trying to find the trail again. I kept walking, thinking the next ridge would be the one. The next clearing would show me where I was. The snow fell so thick I could barely see 50 feet ahead. It was nightmare territory, the kind of terrifying, eerie landscape that makes your survival instincts scream. That's when I first noticed the tracks. There were footprints in the snow behind me. Human footprints, fresh ones. The snow was still falling, but these prints were distinct enough that I could see every detail. A boot pattern, medium-sized, walking in my exact path, following my exact route through the forest. I stopped moving and turned around. I couldn't see anyone, just the dark shapes of trees and the endless fall of snow. But someone was out here with me. Someone was following me through this chilling wilderness. I told myself it was probably another hiker. Someone else who had gotten lost, following my tracks because they seemed to be going somewhere. That made sense. That was the rational explanation. But something in my chest tightened. Something in my primitive brain recognized that this was wrong. I started walking faster. The snow crunched under my boots. My breath came out in ragged clouds. I was trying to convince myself that I was just being paranoid, that there was a perfectly reasonable explanation. But that feeling you get when you know something is watching you, that unsettling, terrifying awareness that you are prey, was starting to creep through my body. I looked back again. The footprints were still there, still following, still in my exact path. But they looked strange now. The spacing between them seemed wrong somehow. Too long, too uneven, like whoever was making them was not walking normally. Like they were running, or stumbling, or moving in a way that a human body shouldn't move. The fear that seized me was sharp and immediate. I picked up my pace. I was practically speed walking through the snow now, pushing through drifts that were getting deeper by the minute. My legs were burning. My lungs were screaming for air. But I kept going, because those footprints were still back there, and they were still following, and with every glance behind me, I couldn't see anyone making them. I came to a clearing, a small meadow surrounded by tall firs. The snow here was unbroken, pristine white, stretching in all directions. And I could see my own footprints very clearly, leading from the forest on one side all the way to where I was standing. I could trace my entire path through the clearing, and beyond my footprints, at the edge of the forest I had just come from, there were other tracks. The second set of footprints, still following, still in perfect alignment with mine, still with that wrong, unsettling spacing that made my stomach clench with fear. I stood there trying to figure out what was happening. A disturbing thought was crystallizing in my mind. A thought that felt insane but was becoming harder to dismiss. What if those footprints weren't new? What if they had been following me the entire time, and I was only now noticing them because we had reached open ground? What if someone, or something, had been behind me since I left the trail? I didn't want to turn around and look. Every instinct told me not to turn around. The kind of primal, chilling instinct that kept my ancestors alive when they were prey animals in the dark. But I did turn around. I had to know. The footprints continued from where I was standing, stretching back across the clearing. I counted them, counted each individual step all the way to the tree line. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it might burst through my ribs. Because those footprints ended at the trees, exactly where my footprints began. There was no one between me and those trees. No one visible, no shadow, no figure, no shape that could be a person. Just the endless, eerie white of falling snow. But those tracks were real. Physically real. I could reach down and touch them if I wanted to. They weren't hallucinations. They weren't my mind playing tricks. Someone was following me. Someone was keeping perfect pace with my movements. And they were staying just beyond my line of sight. The horror of that realization nearly stopped my heart. I had been hiking for hours with a follower that I couldn't see. Every time I had glanced back and seen the tracks but no person, they had been there. Waiting, watching, always behind, never ahead, never trying to catch up, just following, observing, keeping pace in this terrifying nightmare landscape. I started moving again. I couldn't stay in that clearing. I felt too exposed, too visible. I headed back into the forest, hoping to find something familiar, some landmark I recognized. The snow was deeper now. It came up past my knees in some places. My legs were shaking from exertion and fear. The cold was beginning to bite through my layers. My hands were getting numb. I looked back frequently, too frequently, and every single time, those footprints were still there, still following, never varying from my exact path, never deviating. It was like I was being tracked by something that didn't have its own will, something that was simply mimicking my movements with creepy, disturbing precision. The light was fading out. I had been hiking for more than 9 hours. The sun had disappeared behind the mountains and the heavy cloud cover. The forest was becoming dark, genuinely scary dark. The kind of darkness where your eyes play tricks on you, where shadows move and shift and seem almost alive. I found a dense grove of spruce trees with low branches that hung down to the ground. There was a small hollow underneath, a space where the snow hadn't accumulated as heavily because of the protective canopy above. I crawled in there, still wet, still terrified, and I tried to catch my breath. I sat there in that hollow for what felt like hours, though it was probably only 30 minutes. My phone had no signal. I had a flashlight with failing batteries. I had half a protein bar and a bottle of water. I had a jacket that was keeping some of my body heat in. I had the terrifying certainty that something was out there in the darkness, something that knew where I was, something that had been following me through this chilling nightmare and had finally caught up. But I didn't see anything. I didn't hear anything except the wind and the soft sound of falling snow. The forest was still and quiet and profoundly unsettling. The kind of quiet that feels unnatural, like the world is holding its breath. And then I saw it, a footprint in the snow just outside my shelter. A single print, clear as day in the beam of my failing flashlight. The same boot pattern, the same size, the same unsettling spacing. Someone had walked right past my hiding place, and they had known exactly where I was. My hand shot to my mouth to keep from screaming, because I had not heard anyone approach. I had not heard footsteps. I had not heard breathing or movement or any sound at all. They had simply appeared. The footprint was there in the snow, and I hadn't heard a single thing. I stayed in that shelter all night. I did not sleep. Every few minutes, I would peer out from under the branches and scan the snow with my dying flashlight. And every time, there would be new footprints, just outside my shelter, just beyond the protective canopy of trees, circling, never moving away, never closing the distance, just watching, just waiting. The footprints formed a pattern around my shelter, a circle, an endless, disturbing circle in the snow. Someone, or something, had walked around my hiding place all night long. Round and round, the prints overlapped where they had gone around multiple times. The spacing between each circuit was perfect, consistent, like this was a routine. Like they had done this before. When dawn came, the snow had stopped falling. The light was weak and gray, but it was light. I forced myself to crawl out of that shelter. My body was stiff and cold and screaming with pain. Every muscle felt like it was made of concrete. But I had to move. I had to try to find my way back to the trail, back to civilization, back to somewhere safe. I stood up and looked around. The forest extended in all directions. I had no idea which way to go. The snow covered everything. The landmarks were meaningless. I was lost, truly lost, and the footprints were still there. I started walking. I chose a direction at random and I started walking. The cold bit through my jacket. My fingers were white. My toes had gone numb. But I kept moving, because moving felt better than standing still, because motion felt like progress, even though I knew I was probably just walking in circles. And the footprints, they were still there, still behind me, still following, still with that wrong, unsettling pattern. But now I was noticing something else. The prints in front of me, the ones that I was walking toward, they looked like fresh snow had fallen on top of them, but I could still see the indentations. Someone had been walking in front of me as well. Someone had been leading me, and someone had been following me. I was in the middle of something, trapped between two sets of footprints. The horror of that realization nearly destroyed my mind. I started running. I crashed through the deep snow, through branches that clawed at my face and drew blood. I ran without direction, without purpose, just trying to escape from those chilling, impossible footprints. But I could feel them. I could sense them all around me, leading and following, hurting me, moving me like I was prey in some elaborate, terrifying hunt. I ran for what felt like hours. My body was failing. My lungs were on fire. The cold was killing me slowly. I fell. I lay in the snow and I couldn't get up. I didn't have the strength. I was finished. The horror and exhaustion had finally broken something in me. That's when the helicopter found me. A search and rescue team spotted my yellow jacket from the air. They picked me up and flew me to the hospital. Severe hypothermia, frostbite on both feet, dehydration, exhaustion, trauma. The doctor said I was hours away from death. The helicopter crew said they found me in a remote area of the forest, at least 5 miles from the trail I had been trying to follow. But here is the part that still keeps me awake at night. Here is the part that makes me question everything I experienced, or everything I remember. The rescue crew told me that when they were flying over the area where they found me, they could see something in the snow. Footprints, thousands of them, all over the mountainside, circling and crisscrossing in patterns that made no sense. The pilot said it looked like someone had been walking in circles for hours, or like multiple people had been walking in the same area simultaneously. But there were no other hikers reported missing that day. No one else had been on that mountain. No one but me. The footprints they saw were all made by the same boot, the same size, the same pattern. All the prints that I had been seeing, all the ones that had been following me, all the ones that had been leading me. They had all been made by the same person. A person who couldn't exist. A person who wasn't there. Or a person who was everywhere at once. I never hiked again. I moved to the city where I didn't have to see forests. I got a job that kept me indoors. I surrounded myself with people and light and noise. Because the truth that I discovered on that mountain, the chilling, terrifying truth that I can to escape, is this. Those footprints didn't stop when I was rescued. Sometimes, when I am alone, I can hear the snow crunching under boots. Footsteps that match my pace exactly. Sounds that fade when I turn around. That resume when I look forward again. The weight of being followed. The sensation of being hunted by something that wears the same size shoe as me. Something that walks exactly like a human. Something that has learned how to follow without ever being seen. And the most horrifying part of all? I am not the only one. They found others since then. People who were lost in snow. People who survived. People who all tell the same story. Footprints that follow. Always behind. Never ahead. A presence that matches your pace. That knows where you are. That walks in perfect synchronization with your movements. Because we never escape from the mountains. We bring something back with us. Something that learned how to walk in human footprints. Something that follows us home. That waits in the dark. That matches our steps perfectly through the snow of the everyday world. The footprints are still behind me. Even now, they never stop. They never rest. They just keep following. Winter nights are different. Darkness falls faster. Sounds carry strangely. And isolation feels absolute. As the next account chillingly reveals. Story 7. Longest night on the road. The clock on my dashboard had been stuck at 11:47 for 3 hours. I know because I kept checking it, watching the minutes refuse to move, watching time itself break down on that empty Wyoming highway. Let me tell you something terrifying about getting lost in a snowstorm at night. It is not the cold that kills you first. It is not even the fear of freezing to death in your car. It is the slow, creeping realization that the rules you have lived by your entire life no longer apply. That the sun might not come up. That morning might never arrive. That you might be trapped in an endless night with something you cannot see but can definitely feel watching you from the darkness beyond your headlights. I had been driving for 6 hours when the snow started. Interstate 80, heading east from Rock Springs, a route I had driven a dozen times for work. Sales conferences, client meetings, the usual grind. Nothing scary about it, just another business trip. Just another long drive through the empty parts of America where the towns are 50 miles apart and the radio only picks up static and the occasional fire and brimstone preacher warning about the end times. The weather report had mentioned light snow, flurries, nothing to worry about. But when the storm hit, it came down like a hammer. One moment the road was clear. The next, I could barely see 10 feet ahead. The snow was not falling. It was attacking. Horizontal sheets of white that hit the windshield with the sound of sand being thrown against glass. I should have pulled over, should have found a motel, should have done a lot of things. But I was only 40 miles from Rollins, 40 miles from a warm bed and a hot meal. I kept driving, slowing down to 30 miles an hour, then 20, then 15. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel. My eyes were burning from staring into the hypnotic swirl of snowflakes in the headlight beams. That is when the road disappeared. Not gradually, not covered by snow. 1 second it was there, solid and real beneath my tires. The next second, it was gone. My car lurched as the pavement simply ended, replaced by packed snow and dirt. I hit the brakes. The car fishtail-ed, spinning in a slow circle before coming to rest, pointing back the way I had come. I sat there, engine idling, heart hammering, trying to understand what had just happened. I checked the GPS on my phone. No signal. The map showed me as a blue dot in the middle of nothing. No roads, no landmarks, just blank space. I put the car in reverse, intending to back up onto the highway. But when I turned to look, there was no highway. Just flat, snow-covered ground stretching away into the storm. The road had vanished completely, like it had never existed. The disturbing part was not that I had somehow driven off the road. The disturbing part was that there were no tracks. I looked back at where my car had come from, and there were no tire marks in the snow. Nothing to indicate how I had gotten to this spot. It was as if I had been placed here by some unseen hand, dropped into this location with no past and no clear future. I grabbed my phone and tried calling for help. No signal, not even emergency services. The screen showed full bars, but when I dialed, nothing happened. The phone just sat there, silent and useless, the glowing screen casting eerie shadows inside the car. That is when I noticed the light, far off to my right, barely visible through the storm, was aglow. Not bright, not inviting, just a pale, sickly yellow light that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. A house, maybe. A farmhouse. Someone who could help. I made the decision to stay with the car. Every survival guide says the same thing. Do not leave your vehicle. Wait for rescue. But as I sat there, watching the snow pile up on the windshield, watching the temperature gauge drop, I realized no rescue was coming. Nobody knew I was out here. The road had vanished. Morning was hours away. The light was still there. Steady. Waiting. I put on every layer I had. My coat, my suit jacket underneath, my tie wrapped around my face like a scarf. I grabbed my phone, checked the battery, 68%, and stepped out into the storm. The cold was immediate and brutal. It felt like walking into a wall of ice. The wind cut through my clothes like they were paper. Every breath burned my lungs. But the light was there, maybe a quarter mile away, and I started walking toward it. The snow was knee-deep. Every step was a battle. My dress shoes, completely wrong for this situation, filled with snow and ice. My feet went numb within minutes, but I kept moving, focused on that light, on the promise of warmth and help and human contact. It took me 20 minutes to reach it, 20 minutes that felt like hours. And when I finally stumbled close enough to see what was casting that glow, my blood went cold in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. It was not a house. It was a car, an old sedan, maybe from the 70s, half buried in a snowdrift. And the light was coming from inside. The dome light was on, that pale yellow glow spilling out through windows that were completely frosted over. I approached carefully. Something about this felt wrong, felt dangerous. The car had been here a long time. The snow around it was undisturbed except for my tracks. No footprints leading away. No signs that anyone had left this vehicle. I wiped the frost from the driver's side window and looked inside. The car was empty. No driver. No passengers. But it was running. I could hear the engine idling, could see exhaust coming from the tailpipe. The heat was on full blast. The radio was playing, though I could not make out the station through the glass. And on the dashboard was a map, a road map of Wyoming, old and faded, marked with a red line showing a route along Interstate 80, the exact route I had been driving. I tried the door. It was unlocked. The interior was warm, almost hot, the heater working overtime. I slid into the driver's seat, grateful for the warmth, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The map was dated 1979, 46 years old. The red line traced from Rock Springs to Rollins. Written in the margin in shaky handwriting were the words, "Road ended at 11:47. Waiting for morning. It has to come eventually. My hands started shaking. I looked at the clock on this dashboard. It read 11:47. I burst out of the car and ran. Blind panic. Pure terror. I crashed back through the snow in the direction I thought I had come from, desperately searching for my own vehicle. But the storm had intensified. Visibility was near zero. I could not see more than a few feet in any direction. That is when I heard the other engines. Multiple cars, all around me, idling in the darkness. I stumbled from one to the next, each one buried in snow, each one running, each one empty. A pickup truck from the 80s. A minivan from the 90s. A Honda sedan from the 2000s. All of them on the same route. All of them with maps marked in red. All of them stopped at 11:47. And in each one, written somewhere inside, was a note. Messages left by drivers who had been trapped here. Some were simple, help, please help. Others were longer, rambling, desperate accounts of waiting for morning that never came. The most chilling one was in the minivan, written in lipstick on the rearview mirror. Day 7. The sun is not real. Morning is a lie. Something is keeping us here. Day 7. I checked my phone. The time still showed 11:47. But when I looked at the date, my stomach dropped. It was not today, this date. It was yesterday. According to my phone, I had been out here for 24 hours. But it felt like minutes. Time was broken here, shattered. That is when I saw them. Figures in the storm, moving between the cars. Dark shapes that were not quite human. Too tall, too thin, moving with a strange, jerking gait like marionettes controlled by drunk puppeteers. They were searching, going from vehicle to vehicle, looking inside, looking for something. I dropped to the ground and lay flat in the snow, my face pressed into the frozen earth, praying they had not seen me. The figures passed close enough that I could hear them. They made sounds, not quite voices, wet, clicking noises like insects communicating. And beneath that, something worse. Laughter, human laughter, coming from mouths that were not human. They moved on, fading back into the storm. And I realized what they were doing. They were checking the cars, making sure their traps were still occupied, making sure the drivers were still waiting for morning, still hoping, still alive enough to feed on. Because that is what this was. A trap, a hunting ground, something that lived in this dead space where the road ended, where time stopped, where morning never came. Something that fed on hope and desperation and the slowly dying warmth of trapped travelers. I crawled through the snow to the nearest car, a newer model, maybe 5 years old. The driver, his seat was adjusted for someone tall. There was a coffee cup in the holder, still full, frozen solid. A briefcase in the back. And on the passenger seat was a phone, dead, but there was a charging cable. I had an idea, a desperate, probably stupid idea. But it was all I had. I went from car to car, collecting phones. 7 of them, all dead or dying. I brought them back to the oldest car, the one from 1979, because it was still running strong, still had power. I plugged them all in using adapters and cables I found scattered through the vehicles. And I waited. While they charged, I read more of the notes left behind. The messages became more disturbing the older the cars were. The driver from 1979 had written his final message on the back of the map. It comes at midnight. Every midnight, when you think you have survived another hour, it comes into the car and takes something. First your hope, then your warmth, then your mind, then you. I can hear myself screaming outside, but I am still in here. It took me but left me behind. I am both places, forever. The horrifying implication was clear. These drivers were still here, somewhere, trapped in multiple states, inside and outside, living and dead, caught in whatever nightmare logic ruled this place. The phones finished charging. I gathered them all, 7 devices clutched in my frozen hands. And I started running, not toward anything, just away from the cars, away from the lights, away from the things in the storm. I ran until I collapsed, until my legs gave out and I fell face first into the snow. I lay there, lungs burning, heart ready to explode, and I looked up at the sky. There were no stars, no clouds, just a flat, gray nothing. Like looking at a wall, like the sky itself was fake. A ceiling painted to look like sky but doing a poor job of it. I pulled out all 7 phones and did the only thing I could think of. I started recording. 7 videos, 7 messages, 7 desperate attempts to document what was happening, to leave evidence, to warn others. And then I waited. Midnight came. I know because all 7 phones hit 12 o'clock at the exact same moment. And the screaming started, from every car, from every direction. The voices of every driver who had ever been trapped here, crying out in unison, a chorus of despair and terror that made my ears bleed. And through the screaming, I heard footsteps, heavy, slow, deliberate, coming toward me. I looked up and saw it, the thing that lived here, the thing that owned this dead space between roads. It was huge, impossibly tall, made of shadow and snow and something else. Something that predated roads, that predated travel. An ancient thing that had found a new way to hunt when humans built their highways through its territory. It reached down for me with hands that had too many fingers. And I did the only thing left to do. I threw all 7 phones as hard as I could in different directions. 7 points of light spreading out into the darkness. 7 videos recording. 7 messages broadcasting on whatever signal they could find. The thing paused, confused. It turned its head, if it had a head, tracking the phones. And in that moment of distraction, I ran. I ran until I saw light. Real light. Red and blue. Flashing. A highway patrol car. An officer stepping out. Calling to me. Real. Solid. Human. I stumbled onto the highway. The real highway. Interstate 80. Right where it had always been. The patrol officer caught me as I fell. He was asking questions. Was I hurt? Where had I been? My car had been found abandoned hours ago. They had been searching hours ago. According to the officer, I had been missing for 14 hours. It was 1:47 p.m. The sun was shining. The storm had passed. But my clock, all my devices, they all still showed 11:47. They found my car exactly where I had left it. On the side of the road. Perfectly safe. No sign I had driven off into nothing. No tracks leading away. Just my car, covered in snow. Waiting. They never found the other cars. The search crews went out. They searched for days, but there were no vehicles in the area. No evidence that anyone else had been trapped there. Just me and my story and 7 phones that showed impossible footage of a place that should not exist. I still have one of those phones. The others disappeared from evidence. Lost in paperwork. Misfiled. Gone. But I kept one. And sometimes, late at night, I watch the video I recorded. I watch myself standing in that dead space, surrounded by phantom cars, waiting for morning that never came. And I see something in the background, just for a frame, maybe 2, a shape, watching me. And it is holding something. A clock, frozen at 11:47. The scary thing is not that I was trapped. The scary thing is that I got out. Because according to every message I read, according to every note left behind, nobody gets out. Nobody escapes, which means I did not escape. I am still there. This is just what comes after. The part where you think you survived. The part where you go back to your life and try to forget. But you never forget, because every night, when my clock hits 11:47, everything stops. The sounds, the movement, time itself, and I hear engines idling in the distance. Waiting, always waiting. The longest night is not the one where morning never comes. It is the one that never ends. The one you keep living over and over. The one where you realize too late that you never left the road at all. You just joined the others. Waiting, forever waiting, trapped at 11:47 on a highway that leads nowhere. And if you are ever driving through Wyoming on a winter night and your clock stops at 11:47, do not stop your car. Do not look for lights in the distance. Do not trust that morning will come. Because it will not. Not for you. Not anymore. You will join us here in the endless night. Another engine idling. Another light in the darkness. Another warning that nobody will ever hear. The road always ends. The only question is whether you notice. Story 8. White silence. Have you ever heard silence so complete, so absolute, that it starts to feel like something living? Something that wraps around you like cold hands and squeezes until you can tell where the quiet ends and your own thoughts begin? I have. And I am here to tell you that true silence is the most terrifying sound in the world. It happened in January, up in the Cascades. I was doing what any reasonable 42-year-old man does after a divorce. Running away. Not literally, of course. I told everyone I was going on a solo winter camping trip to clear my head, to find myself. All that therapeutic garbage people say when their life falls apart. But really, I just wanted to be somewhere so remote, so empty, that I couldn't hear the echo of her voice telling me she met someone else. The trail was supposed to be an easy 6-mile loop. Well marked, popular even in winter. I'd done harder hikes with a hangover. But weather in the mountains doesn't care about your plans or your pain. The storm rolled in fast, one of those freak blizzards that shouldn't happen but does, turning a clear morning into a white nightmare in less than an hour. I lost the trail somewhere around mile 3. One minute I was following the blazes on the trees. The next I was standing in a world where everything looked identical. White ground, white trees, white sky, no horizon, no shadows, no reference points, just endless, suffocating whiteness stretching in every direction. That is when the silence started. At first, I didn't notice it. I was too focused on finding the trail, on not panicking, on convincing myself I'd just backtrack and everything would be fine. But after 20 minutes of stumbling through knee-deep snow, it hit me. There was no sound. None. Not the wind. Not birds. Not even the crunch of my own footsteps seemed to carry. Each sound I made, I'd instantly swallowed by the snow, leaving this horrible void of quiet that pressed against my eardrums like water pressure. I stopped moving, listened. The silence was so heavy I could feel it. Not just hear it or experience the absence of sound, but actually feel it like a physical presence wrapping around my head, crawling into my ears. My heartbeat should have been loud and that quiet. I should have heard my breathing, harsh and panicked, but I didn't. The silence ate everything. That is when the fear really started. Not the rational fear of being lost or freezing to death. Something deeper, more primal. The disturbing realization that I walked into a place where normal rules didn't apply. Where sound went to die. I started moving again. Faster now, pushing through the snow. My legs burned. My lungs screamed for air. But everything was eerily quiet. I couldn't even hear my own breathing anymore. It was like someone had wrapped the entire world in cotton and sucked out all the noise. The silence became this living, breathing thing that followed me through the trees. A presence that made my skin crawl and my stomach clench with dread I couldn't explain. Then I saw the footprints. They appeared suddenly, cutting across my path. Fresh prints in the snow, maybe an hour old. Someone else was out here. Relief flooded through me so intensely my knees almost buckled. I wasn't alone. I could follow these tracks back to the trail, to civilization, to safety. But something about the prints felt wrong. They were barefoot. I stopped, staring at those impossible impressions in the snow. Bare human feet, walking through sub-zero temperatures. No boots, no shoes, just naked prints pressed deep into the powder, showing every toe, every detail. And they were walking in a perfectly straight line through the forest, not deviating around trees or obstacles. Just straight, unnaturally straight. The silence pressed harder against my ears, against my skull. I could feel it now, a pressure building behind my eyes. And in that crushing quiet, I realized I could hear something. Not a sound exactly, more like the memory of sound. A whisper that wasn't there. A voice that spoke in the spaces between my thoughts. Follow. I didn't want to. Every instinct told me to go the opposite direction. But the tracks were the only sign of anything human in this white hell. And I was so cold, so tired, so completely lost that even following bare footprints through impossible silence seemed better than wandering alone until hypothermia took me. I followed them for maybe half a mile. The prints never changed, never showed signs of the person stopping or slowing. Just that same steady, mechanical pace leading deeper into the forest. And the silence got worse, heavier. I started to notice things that didn't make sense. My watch had stopped. The snow falling around me made no sound when it hit the ground. Even my own shadow seemed wrong, too dark, too solid, stretching ahead of me like it was leading the way instead of following. That's when I saw the trees. They changed. Not in any way I could immediately identify, but something about them felt profoundly wrong. The bark looked different, smoother, almost like skin, and they were arranged in patterns now. Perfect circles and geometric shapes that forests don't naturally form. The disturbing realization crept over me that I wasn't in the Cascades anymore. Or at least, not the part of the Cascades that existed on any map. The footprints led to a clearing, perfectly circular, maybe 30 feet across. And in the center, standing completely still, was a figure. At first, I thought it was a person, just someone standing in the snow. But as I got closer, the horror of what I was seeing set in. It was shaped like a person. It had arms and legs and a head, but it was made entirely of snow, not built like a snowman. More like someone had taken a human being and replaced every cell with compacted ice and powder. It stood there, facing away from me, and the silence around it was so absolute it hurt. Like standing next to a black hole of sound. I should have run, but I couldn't. To move. The silence held me in place, freezing me as surely as the cold. And slowly, so slowly, the figure began to turn. It had my face, not approximately my face, not sort of like me. It was exactly me. Every detail, every line, every scar, my face, rendered in snow and ice, staring at me with eyes that were just hollow pockets of darkness. Its mouth opened, and even though no sound came out, I heard it. Felt it, words that bypassed my ears and spoke directly into my brain. You came to find silence. Here it is, perfect, complete, forever. The figure started walking toward me. Each step it took made the silence deeper, heavier, more suffocating. I could feel it pressing into my chest now, crushing my lungs, making it impossible to breathe. My vision started to gray at the edges. I was suffocating not from lack of air but from too much quiet. The absence of sound was drowning me. I ran, crashed through the forest with everything I had, branches tearing at my face, snow grabbing at my legs like hands trying to pull me down. Behind me, I could hear it. Not footsteps, not breathing, just this terrible, creeping expansion of silence, eating up the world, swallowing everything in its path. A wave of absolute quiet that would erase me if it caught up. I don't know how long I ran. Time felt wrong, broken. I did look at my watch and see it had been 5 minutes, then look again and somehow I'd gone backward 3. The forest seemed to shift around me. Trees rearranging themselves, paths appearing and disappearing. And through it all, that crushing silence followed, patient and inevitable. Then I heard it, the most beautiful sound I ever experienced in my life. A dog barking, distant, muffled, but real, actual sound breaking through the horrible quiet. I ran toward it, using every ounce of strength I had left, and suddenly I broke through a wall I hadn't known was there. Sound rushed back, the crunch of snow under my boots, wind in the trees, my own ragged breathing. The world snapped back into focus, and I could see the trail marker 20 feet ahead. I made it. The dog was a golden retriever, off-leash, bounding through the snow. Its owner, a woman in her 50s, looked at me with concern. Asked if I was okay. I must have looked insane. Snow-covered, wild-eyed, shaking not from cold but from something far worse. I told her I'd gotten turned around in the storm. She helped me back to the trailhead, called it lucky that I found my way back. Said people die out here every winter, get lost and never found. But here is what I didn't tell her, what I can tell anyone without sounding crazy. When we passed that clearing, the perfectly circular one that shouldn't exist, I looked back. Just for a second, and standing at the edge, barely visible through the trees, was the figure. Still made of snow, still wearing my face, still watching. And around it, the silence waited, patient, hungry, growing. I moved to Phoenix after that. Desert, heat, noise, constant, blessed noise. Traffic and people and life happening at full volume. I can to stand quiet anymore. Can to sleep without a fan running, music playing, television on. Even a few seconds of silence makes my heart race and my skin crawl. Because I know it is still out there. That place where sound goes to die. That impossible clearing where something wearing my face waits in the crushing quiet. Sometimes, on cold winter nights when the air is still and the world gets a little too quiet, I can feel it. That pressure against my eardrums. That weight pressing in. The white silence reaching out, trying to pull me back. Reminding me that I only escaped. That the debt I paid. That silence like that, perfect and complete and alive, doesn't let go easily. And the truly terrifying part? I started seeing it in photographs. Not the figure, the silence. There is a quality to certain images now. Pictures of snow-covered forests. Empty winter landscapes. Something in the way the white space sits that makes my stomach turn. Like I'm looking at doorways, entrances to that place. And every winter, when the snow falls heavy enough, I wonder if one of those doorways is going to open. If that crushing quiet is going to reach through and drag me back to where I really belong. Because here is what I realized, lying awake at night in my Phoenix apartment, surrounded by artificial noise. That thing wearing my face, it wasn't trying to catch me. It was showing me what I did become, what I wanted. I had gone into those mountains looking for silence, for escape from the noise of my failed marriage and broken life. And I found it. True silence, absolute and perfect. The horror that such a place exists. The horror is that part of me wants to go back. That when the world gets too loud, too chaotic, too overwhelming, I remember that clearing. That perfect quiet. And I understand, with a dread that makes my hands shake, that the silence hunting me. It's waiting for me to come home. Search teams often say the same thing. People are usually found closer than expected. But this next story breaks that rule in a disturbing way. Story 9. Found too late. They found my campsite exactly where I said it would be. Every detail matched my description perfectly. The problem was, I was still lost when they found it. Let me explain something terrifying about search and rescue operations in the Adirondacks. When they find your camp, when they locate your gear, when they discover the place you spent your last night alive, they expect to find you nearby. Dead or alive, you should be within a reasonable radius. What they do not expect, what makes absolutely no sense, is finding your camp perfectly preserved while you are calling them from 40 miles away. describing a completely different location, insisting you never left. I had gone into the mountains for a solo winter camping trip. 3 days, nothing extreme. I had done this route a dozen times. The trail from Heart Lake to Marcy Dam, then up to Lake Colden. Standard stuff for anyone who knows the high peaks. I had the right gear, the right experience, the right permits. Everything by the book. The snow started on day 2. Not unexpected. The forecast had called for light snow, maybe 3 inches. What hit us was 2 feet in 6 hours. A freak storm that shut down highways and stranded people across 3 states. I made the smart choice. I set up camp early, found a protected spot near the lake, got my tent secured, built up a good supply of firewood. I was prepared to wait it out. That night, inside my sleeping bag, listening to the wind howl and the snow pile up on the tent, I felt safe. Uncomfortable, cold, but safe. I had food for 5 days. I had fuel for my stove. I had layers and a good sleeping bag rated for negative temperatures. I would be fine. I fell asleep around 9 p.m. When I woke up, everything had changed. The first thing I noticed was the silence. No wind, no sound of snow falling on the tent. Just absolute, crushing silence. I checked my watch. It read 6:23 a.m. I had slept 9 hours. I unzipped the tent and looked outside. The landscape was wrong. I do not mean it was covered in snow. I mean it was fundamentally different. The lake that had been 30 feet from my tent was gone. In its place was dense forest. Old-growth pines that would take centuries to reach that size. The mountains in the distance were the wrong shape. The clearing where I had set up camp had become a narrow gap between massive trees. And my campfire from the night before was still burning. Fresh wood on it, flames dancing like I had just added fuel. But I had let it die before going to sleep. I had made sure. You do not leave fires burning in your tent overnight. That is basic safety. I stood there in my long underwear, shivering, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Had I sleepwalked? Had I somehow moved my entire camp in the middle of the night without remembering? But my tent was staked down. My gear was arranged exactly as I had left it. Nothing had moved except the world around me. I grabbed my GPS unit. No signal. The screen showed me as a blinking dot in the middle of blank space. No trails, no landmarks, just emptiness. My phone was the same. No service, no data. The map application showed my last known location as Lake Colden, but the timestamp was from yesterday afternoon, before I had set up camp. The disturbing part, the part that made my hands shake and my breath come in short gasps, was the footprints. There were tracks all around my tent. Human footprints, bare feet, in 2 feet of snow, in sub-zero temperatures, dozens of them, circling my tent, coming close, pulling back, like something had been pacing around me all night, working up the courage to come inside. I packed my gear with shaking hands. Every survival instinct I had was screaming at me to get out, to move, to find familiar ground. I shouldered my pack and started walking in what I thought was north. The sun was up, pale and weak through the clouds, giving me a general direction. I walked for 6 hours. The forest never changed. Same massive trees, same oppressive silence. No animal tracks, no birds, no signs of life except those horrifying bare footprints that appeared every few hundred yards, always fresh, always leading in the same direction I was walking. Like something was ahead of me, leaving a trail, wanting me to follow. By noon, I was starting to panic. Real, deep panic. I should have crossed trails. I should have hit landmarks I knew. The Adirondacks are well mapped. You cannot walk in a straight line for 6 hours without hitting something human-made. But there was nothing, just endless forest and those unsettling footprints. That is when I found my camp again. Same tent, same arrangement, same campfire still burning with fresh wood. It was impossible. I had walked in a straight line. I had kept the sun on my right. I had not circled back. But here was my camp, exactly as I had left it that morning, except the footprints around it were different. More of them, closer, and in the snow near the tent flap was a message, written in a shaking hand with a stick or finger. Do not follow the prints. Do not trust the camp. Move perpendicular. My handwriting, my words, but I had not written them. I had no memory of writing them. The creepy realization hit me like a physical blow. I was looping. Somehow, this place was folding back on itself, returning me to this spot no matter which direction I walked. And a version of me, some other iteration, had already figured this out and left a warning. I forced myself to think, to reason through the horror. If I was looping, if the space was somehow circular or recursive, then I needed to break the pattern. I needed to do something different. The message said move perpendicular. I took out my compass. It was spinning. The needle would not settle. It just rotated slowly, clockwise, never pointing to magnetic north. Useless. But it gave me an idea. If the compass could not find north, maybe north did not exist here. Maybe the normal rules did not apply. I sat down in the snow and started doing trigonometry in my head. If I was looping every 6 hours of walking, and if the loop was circular, I could calculate the radius. Then I could plot a perpendicular path that would, theoretically, take me out of the circle. It was insane. It was desperate. But it was all I had. I gathered my gear and started walking at what I calculated was a 90-degree angle from my previous path. The footprints were there, parallel to me now, no longer leading. Whatever was making them did not like this. The tracks became more erratic, frantic, running in circles, doubling back. I walked for 3 hours. My legs were screaming. My back was aching under the pack. But the forest started to change. The trees were getting smaller, younger. I could see gaps in the canopy. And then, like walking through a curtain, I was back in normal space. I recognized where I was immediately. The trail to Marcy Dam. I was maybe 2 miles from Heart Lake. Civilization. Safety. I started running, laughing with relief, tears freezing on my face. I made it to the ranger station by nightfall. I told them everything. They were skeptical but concerned. A winter storm. Possible hypothermia. Confusion. They wanted to send a team to check my campsite, to gather my gear, to document the scene. I gave them the exact coordinates. Lake Colden, the spot where I had camped, where I thought I had camped. The search team went out the next morning. They found my tent, my gear, my supplies. Everything was there. My campfire was burning, fresh wood. And around the tent were those horrible bare footprints. Dozens of them. But they also found something else. Inside the tent was a body. My body. Dead for at least 3 days based on the condition. Frozen solid. Curled up in the sleeping bag. Face locked in an expression of absolute terror. Cause of death listed as exposure and possible cardiac arrest from extreme fear. But I was standing in the ranger station when they radioed this in. I was alive. I was warm. I was real. The rangers stared at me like I was a ghost. One of them reached out and touched my arm, just to make sure I was solid. They brought the body back. It looked exactly like me. Same clothes, same gear, same scars and birthmarks. DNA tests confirmed it. That was me in that tent. Dead, frozen, left behind. The official explanation was twin brother. Unknown sibling. Mistaken identity. But I do not have a twin. My parents confirmed it. Birth records confirmed it. That body was mine and I was still alive and nobody could explain how both things were true. The disturbing theory, the one nobody wanted to say out loud, was that I had not escaped the loop. I had split from it. One version of me had stayed, had died in that tent while something circled outside, waiting. Another version had somehow broken free, had become real, had made it out. But here's the truly horrifying part, the part that keeps me awake at night, the part that makes me question everything. When they examined the body, when they cataloged every detail, they found something in the dead man's pocket. A note, written in my handwriting, dated 3 days in the future from when they found him. It said, I am not the one who got out. I am the one who stayed. The one who escaped is not me. It is what was making the footprints. It is wearing my face. It is living my life. And it is writing this to confuse anyone who finds me. Do not trust it. Do not believe it. It is still in the loop. It has always been in the loop. It has just learned how to leave copies behind. The rangers showed me this note, asked me if I had written it. I said no, I had no memory of it, but the handwriting was perfect, identical to mine, every loop and curve exact. They let me go. What else could they do? I was alive. I had no criminal record. I had not done anything wrong, but they kept the case open, kept investigating, kept checking on me, and I kept living. Went back to work, went back to my apartment, went back to my normal life, but nothing felt right. Food tasted wrong. Colors seemed off. My friends looked at me strangely, like they could sense something different. I started noticing things. Small things at first. My apartment was arranged differently than I remembered. Photos on my phone from trips I did not recall taking. People who claimed to know me but who I could not remember meeting. And every morning, when I woke up, I would find footprints. Bare feet. In the carpet. In the bathroom. On the kitchen floor. Circling my bed. Always fresh. Always during the night. Always gone by the time I tried to photograph them. I went back to the mountains last week. Back to Lake Colden. Back to the spot where they found my tent. Someone had been camping there recently. The fire pit had fresh ashes. There were footprints all around. And carved into a tree nearby was a message. Loop 247. Still trying. Still failing. It got out. I am still here. I do not know which version I am. I do not know if I am the one who escaped or the one who is still trapped, leaving messages in different iterations of reality. I do not know if I am human or something else, something that learned to be human by studying the man who died in that tent. What I do know is that every 6 hours, exactly 6 hours, I feel something pull at me. A tug, like gravity, but wrong. And for just a moment, I see the forest, the massive trees, the wrong mountains, the burning campfire, and I see myself sitting by the fire, staring back at me with empty eyes. The search teams found my campsite. They found my body. They found the truth, but the truth was too scary to accept, too disturbing to process, so they filed it away, marked it unsolved. Let me walk free, but I am not free. I am still in the loop. We all are, every version, every iteration. Some of us have just learned to pretend we got out, learned to act human, learned to live in the world beyond the circle. And sometimes, late at night, I wonder if you are too. If everyone is, if we are all just copies that escaped, leaving our real selves behind in the snow, frozen and terrified and endlessly looping. The horrifying thing about being found too late is not that you are dead. It is that you are both, dead and alive, lost and found, trapped and free, all at once, forever, and somewhere in the Adirondacks, in a forest that might not exist on any map, a campfire is still burning. A tent is still standing, and something is still circling, making footprints, waiting, trying to understand what it means to be human, trying to escape, just like I did, just like you might have to someday. Story 10. Map was wrong. The scariest moment of my life was when I realized I was lost. It was when I discovered that someone had deliberately sent me there. That the map I trusted, the one I followed for hours into the frozen mountains of Montana, had been altered, changed, designed to lead me exactly where I ended up, and whatever was waiting for me in that isolated valley had been expecting my arrival. I am a surveyor, have been for 20 years. I know maps like most people know their own neighborhood. Topographic lines, elevation markers, coordinate systems. It is all second nature to me. So when the Forestry Service contracted me to survey a remote section of the Bitterroot Range in February, I didn't think twice about it. Standard job, good pay, 3 days in the backcountry, mark some boundary lines, take some measurements, get out before the next storm hit. They gave me the maps at the ranger station, official USGS topographic sheets, sealed in plastic, with my route highlighted in yellow. The ranger who handed them over was new. Young guy, maybe 25, with nervous eyes that wouldn't quite meet mine. He told me the area had been closed for years due to avalanche danger, but they were reopening it and needed current survey data. He said it 3 times, like he was memorizing lines, like someone had told him exactly what to say. I should have noticed that, should have paid attention to the way his hands shook when he gave me the maps. But I was focused on the job, on getting in and out before the weather turned. I loaded my truck, drove to the trailhead, and started hiking at dawn. The first day was normal, cold but clear. The trail matched the map perfectly. Every switchback, every landmark, exactly where it should be. I made good time, covered 8 miles by late afternoon, and set up camp near a frozen creek. Ate my dinner, checked my GPS. Everything aligned. I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Day 2 is when things started feeling wrong. The trail on the map showed a gentle ascent through a pine forest, following a ridgeline for about 6 miles before dropping into the valley I needed to survey. But when I started hiking that morning, the terrain didn't match. The ridge was steeper, rockier. The trees were different, bare aspens instead of pines, and there were no trail markers. None, like nobody had been through here in years. I stopped and pulled out the map, checked my GPS. The GPS said I was in one place. The map said I should be seeing something completely different. At first, I thought it was a GPS error. Satellite coverage can be spotty in mountain valleys, but my compass agreed with the GPS. The map was wrong. I'd been doing this job long enough to know that maps, especially government survey maps, don't just have errors like this. They rechecked and rechecked, verified against satellite imagery, but I was looking at a trail that existed on paper and nowhere else. Looking at terrain features that didn't match reality. And the creepy part, the part that made my stomach clench, was that someone had drawn this map by hand. Not printed it from a computer, Someone had sat down and carefully, deliberately, created a false version of this landscape. The smart move would have been turning back right then. But I was already 10 miles in. The weather was holding, and I convinced myself there was a reasonable explanation. Maybe this was an old map. Maybe the trail had been rerouted. Maybe I was overthinking it. So I kept going, following my GPS instead of the map, heading toward where the valley should be. That's when I found the cairns. Rock piles, dozens of them, all along the ridge, spaced about 50 feet apart, leading deeper into the mountains. But these weren't the normal trail cairns. They were too big, too deliberately constructed. Each one was maybe 4 feet tall, built from stones that had been carried from somewhere else. And on top of each cairn was a piece of orange surveyor, this tape. Faded, old, like it had been there for years. I stood there looking at those markers, and the fear that had been lurking at the edges of my mind suddenly took center stage. Someone had been here before me, another surveyor, and they left a trail. But if there was already a trail marked, why was I here? Why had they sent me to resurvey an area that had clearly been surveyed before? The wind picked up, temperature dropping fast, dark clouds building on the horizon. The smart move was definitely turning back now. But those cairns led somewhere, and I needed to know where, needed to understand what I walked into. So I followed them. The cairns led down into a valley that shouldn't exist. I checked the map again. According to the official topographic sheet, this valley wasn't here. The terrain should have continued climbing toward a mountain peak, but I was standing at the edge of a deep bowl-shaped depression, maybe 2 miles across, ringed by steep cliffs. And at the bottom, I could see structures. Buildings, a whole settlement sitting in the snow. My hands started shaking, and it wasn't from the cold. This was wrong. Deeply, fundamentally wrong. You just miss an entire valley when you remaking maps. You to accidentally leave off a settlement. This had been hidden, deliberately erased from the official records, and someone had given me a false map designed to lead me here. I started down into the valley. The cairns continued, leading me along a narrow path carved into the cliff face. About halfway down, I found another piece of evidence that made my blood run cold. A backpack, modern, maybe 5 years old, torn open, contents scattered in the snow, surveying equipment, a GPS unit with a shattered screen, and a journal. I picked it up with trembling fingers. The pages were stiff with ice, but I could still read the entries. They were dated from 3 years ago. A surveyor, just like me, hired to map this same area, given the same false map, led to this same valley. The entries started normal, professional observations about terrain and coordinates, but they got progressively more disturbing, more frantic. By the final entry, the handwriting was barely legible. They knew I would come here. They wanted me to find it. And now I've seen too much. They re-watching from the buildings. I can see them in the windows. They were not moving, just standing there, waiting. God help me. I think they've been waiting for decades. I am going to try to climb out tonight. If anyone finds this, to go down there. The map is wrong on purpose. This valley is a trap. The entry ended mid-sentence. I looked down at the settlement, looked at those dark windows, and I saw them. Figures, standing perfectly still behind the glass. At least a dozen of them, in different buildings, all facing up toward me. All watching. The horror of realization hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't an accident. This was deliberate. Someone in the forestry service, maybe that nervous young ranger, maybe someone higher up, was sending surveyors to this valley, leading them here with false maps. And those figures down there, those things standing motionless in the windows, they were waiting, collecting, adding to whatever nightmare existed in that impossible settlement. I ran, dropped the journal, and scrambled back up the path, my boots slipping on ice, my lungs burning in the thin mountain air. Behind me, I heard something that made my soul freeze. Not a sound exactly, more like the absence of sound. A silence so complete it felt predatory, like the entire valley was holding its breath. I didn't look back, couldn't look back. I just climbed, using the cairns to guide me, pulling myself up the cliff face with bleeding fingers. When I reached the top, I kept running, followed my own tracks back through the snow, back toward the trailhead, back toward anything resembling civilization. The storm hit an hour later. Whiteout conditions. I lost the trail, lost my sense of direction, lost everything except the pure animal panic driving me forward. I should have died out there. Hypothermia, exposure, Take your pick. But I didn't. I stumbled onto a logging road just before dark. Flagged down a truck. Made it to a hospital where they treated me for frostbite and exhaustion. I tried to report it. Went to the ranger station. But the young ranger was gone. Transferred. They said. No forwarding information. And when I asked about the survey job, about the maps they'd given me, they looked at me like I was crazy. No record of any contract. No record of me ever being hired. The maps I'd been given had vanished from my truck. Everything was gone. Erased. But here is the terrifying part. The part that keeps me awake at night. That made me quit surveying and move to a city where the only wilderness is in parks and the only maps show streets and buildings. 2 months after I got back, I received a package. No return address. Inside was a new topographic map of the Bitterroot Range. Professional quality. Official looking. And there, right where that valley should be, was nothing. Just contour lines showing continuous terrain, like the valley didn't exist. But someone had made a small mark on the map, a tiny X in red ink. And next to it, in handwriting I recognized from that journal I found, were 3 words. They were still waiting. Don, do you know how many surveyors they sent to that valley? Don, do you know how many people followed those false maps into isolation, thinking they were doing a routine job? The young ranger with the nervous eyes. Was he a victim? A recruiter? Both? And those figures standing in the windows, were they the missing surveyors? Or something older? Something that had been using that hidden valley as a trap long before topographic maps even existed? I burned that map. Burned everything related to that job. But I can burn the memory. To erase the image of those figures standing motionless in the windows, watching me with impatience that felt ancient and hungry. Sometimes, late at night, I think about that valley, about the settlement that shouldn't exist, about the careful, deliberate evil of creating a false map designed to lead people into darkness. And I wonder how many other maps are wrong, how many other valleys exist in the blank spaces of official surveys, hidden and waiting. How many other people are following routes that were designed not to help them navigate, but to deliver them to something that has been patient for a very long time. The map was wrong, but it was wrong on purpose. And that is the most terrifying truth of all. Somewhere in a government office, someone is still printing those false maps. Still hiring surveyors, still sending them into the mountains with routes that lead exactly where they were supposed to go. Not to civilization, not to safety, but to isolation, to cold, to whatever lives in valleys that don't exist on any real map. And it's still waiting, still watching, still collecting those who trust the wrong piece of paper and follow it into the frozen dark.